Well, hello everyone, and thank you so much for coming to our third Conversations at St Aidan's event, especially on this lovely, warm, sunny evening. It's great to have you with us, so thank you for choosing this over the sunshine. And it's lovely in particular to hear from Mim Skinner this evening about her life, work, and what it takes to live in community. Just the basic health and safety announcements before we get started. There are fire exits behind me and through the doors at the back, and there are toilets by that entrance and through the door at the back on the right. I'll chat to Mim for about 40 minutes or so, and then we'll have time for Q&A before we wrap up around 8:30. And Mim will be around and has a few books with her for sale at the back, so if you'd like to buy one or just say hello at the end, please feel free. But first, let me introduce Mim. Mim is a writer and social enterprise founder living in County Durham. She's published 2 books. The first was Jailbirds, which then got retitled and reprinted as The Prison Teacher, and Living Together, which is her second book. And Jailbirds was one of Stylist's top 20 books for 2020 and was optioned by BBC Studios for a drama series. She's also written for The Guardian, The Sunday Times Style, Elle Magazine, The I Paper, Huffington Post, and a number of other magazines. And in 2019, she won a place on Elle Magazine's list of 50 game changers of now for her writing and campaign work. In 2015, she co-founded Refuse Cafe, the multi-award-winning social enterprise, which works to prevent food waste through grassroots community action and education. And any donations given this evening will go to support the work of Refuse. And it's also well worth a visit to the cafe if you're ever in Chesterley Street. Mim has also spent a lot of time living in different communities, including the questionable privilege of living with me and my husband during my first pregnancy and after our daughter was born. So it's a real delight to have her here this evening to talk about her life, work, and community living. So please would you welcome her with a warm round of applause. Hopefully the mics are working. Can everybody hear us all right? Hello? Yeah, lovely. So Mim, welcome to St Aidan's. We'll sort of, I've put down we'll start with your early life. We won't go quite all the way back to the story of your birth. But you've lived and worked in County Durham for the last about 15 years, but your accent isn't from here. So tell us a bit about where and how you grew up and what your family was like.
Yeah, I am from, can you hear me okay? Am I on? Yeah, I'm from just south of London and grew up between there and a farm in France, and came up to County Durham for university, hadn't been here before, so, and just never moved back and just really loved the county and got kind of stuck into more and more things until I looked around and thought, oh my goodness, I've been here for 15 years now, you know, almost as long as I was down in South London. I have a 2-year-old and a 9-month-old, so the sort of good luck. The sort of a shot ahead for Hannah. And me and my husband live in Neville's Cross, just outside Durham.
And during your time when you first moved up to Durham was sort of your first experience of community living, but you had kind of experiences of a similar lifestyle when you were growing up as well. So do you want to tell a little bit about that sort of transition, I guess, or what experiences you had of like community life as growing up, and then your first community house and where you lived?
Yeah, absolutely. My mum was just this very, very open character. I'm sure you've got, you know, people like her, and was also quite a kind of funky thinker. She was autistic, so didn't necessarily have the same risk boundary as what other one might. Like, you know, my friends would sort of see our house as a, oh, the you know, the strange man from with the SpongeBob pyjama buttons from the benches in your kitchen. So that was kind of quite commonplace. In fact, yeah, Mum was just all over a quirky character. She's been dead for quite a few years now, but I remember I got to university and there was a guy on my floor who'd been from the same town as us and had a paper round, and he came into our room. We were having a drink before a night out, and he looked at some photos on a notice board and went, oh my God, your mum's the crazy rabbit woman. Because she used to just sort of take our rabbit for a walk into town, get a coffee. She didn't really have, like I said, the same maybe judgments about who was weird and who wasn't weird. So she had some very strange friends, and she'd carry this rabbit and chat to lots of people. And people, they were quite surprised to know that she sort of had a family and 3 children, and I was otherwise just actually quite a brilliant character, because all they saw was this slightly mad rabbit woman who at 5 a.m. was traipsing around near the train station.
So people were in and out of your house growing up, and then when you got to university, you didn't think, I'd like a break from that actually, and a bit of sort of normality. You decided to move into your first community living situation. So how did that come about, and what was that like?
Yeah, I mean, I think different people react in different ways to that, don't they? So my younger sister felt exactly like that. She's much more of an introvert than me, and was ready for a break, and felt quite exasperated at times when we were younger. But I guess that just suited me more. And I was involved with a church when we were at university, and were thinking a lot around social justice, and particularly volunteered running a kind of like a soup kitchen, where we used to use wasted food and make this soup kitchen. And we kind of got into conversation one day with some friends. We'd just graduated, and we were kind of working, with a coffee shop and a bit with a play group, and doing bits and bobs. And we kind of had this conversation about why are there spare rooms and people who are homeless, and thought, okay, well, why don't we do something about it? So in part of that conversation was this guy who had a house. He was a landlord, and said, oh, well, you could use my house, because obviously you can't do that with anyone's house. I mean, you could, you just have to keep it very quiet. But he was on board, put in some bunk beds, and we worked out that if we shared rooms, most of us, then we could cover the rent for this spare room. And we had these kind of big visions about, I don't know if anyone else is very idealistic at the age of 19. But we definitely were both idealistic about the kind of impact we could make, the risks that we were posing, and how much it was really needed. I mean, we were just totally inexpert, didn't really understand much, or had to learn very quickly about some of the issues that were going on around there, whether that was imprisonment or around crime, and people being either perpetrators or victims of crime, whether around drugs and abuse, and all of those things we had to learn very, very quickly, because the people that came onto our doorstep, that was their experience of life. And actually we were just quite overprivileged university students who had leapt in feet first. But I remember that time in that house so fondly, and never since then have I lived so in line with my own values. And I feel at the moment that we live, as a family now, and I'm just constantly feel totally compromised in my values. I'm like a single-use plastic factory at ours. It's like, just more wet wipes, more nappies. Like, I haven't got the energy to chop a thing, just stick in a ready meal, and all these things that I'm just like, I feel I live at odds with my values, and it's quite hard to not be that way, I think, in the modern world, unless you're going to, go and live in a wood somewhere. But at that time in my life, there was a really kind of amazing sense of, I'm sort of doing what I think I should be doing, and that was a real gift, and for its time as well. We used to go into the supermarket bins and collect all the food, and have big open house dinners for anyone who needed to. People would stop round who were rough sleeping and do their washing. We were night stop hosts, and we were able to get people who, for whatever reason, needed a bed, who would stay kind of short or long term. Some people would stay for one night. One guy who was 18 and straight from street homelessness stayed for 6 months. But I guess that was my first taste of what could communal living look like? Because there were so many of us who were really passionate about it. There's something about having, what's the phrase? Almost like enough people that there's a buzz around it, and it doesn't feel heavy because there's lots of you sharing it, and you can do quite brave things, and you think, oh, well, there's a bit of padding around that. But as you might have guessed, I'm not living in that house now, because honestly, by the time we left there, I felt so burnt out by it. I was working at the same time in the prison system, teaching in a women's prison. I was writing, I was running this soup kitchen with a friend, we were founding a social enterprise, and I just wanted to go and sit in a dark, cold room for about 6 months, come the end of my 20s, which, I mean, that's the time you can do it, isn't it? But it's not sustainable, is the truth. That wasn't a sustainable form of activism, and did we really make a ginormous difference to homelessness in Durham and County Durham? No, we didn't. But I do think it created that little space where people could come and feel energised and think differently, and you might meet somebody like totally different from yourself across the table. It's funny, I remember the night my poor husband, but I met him at our community. This is very segue, but I've gone for it. I met him at this community kitchen we used to run, the kind of early days of Refuse that went on to be. And I asked him out on a date, of course, bless him. It was at my house with about 20 other people just for the communal meal. And he sat down, and to his left was a guy who was about our age but had just finished a life sentence. And on his right was the UK's only transgender trainee astronaut. And it was like, if he is able to have both those conversations and together in a way that feels like, non-judgmental and loving, you're in. We best get you snapped up. And he did the washing up, so yeah. But yeah, it was this just kind of energetic space, and I guess what the book was born out of was me feeling like, oh, I want to get that back, but in a way that is lifelong and is measured and could include families.
And there were two really long-term things that came out of that community house. One was, I guess, The Prison Teacher, your first book, because you were working in women's prison at the time, and the other was, of course, Refuse Cafe. So do you want to tell us a little bit about those two? We'll start with your time in the women's prison, and the sort of work you were doing there. That forms the basis of your first book. But yeah, just a little insight into, that experience, what it was you expect, was it what you expected, what surprised you most? And yeah, it's a very different kind of community forming if you are doing education work and sort of inclusion work in that kind of environment. So yeah, tell us a little bit about that and what led you to think that was worth putting down in a book.
Yeah, that's interesting. I got that job because I had started to meet within this context some women who'd been to prison, and I found that intriguing, and then went towards it. It was my first job that wasn't a coffee shop, so God bless them hiring me, really. I was such a novice. But I was doing a couple of things in there. One was a teaching job, so people who were really on the fringes of that prison, so not able to engage in education, employment or training for some reason, would come to me and would do kind of arts, and that was so free. It's amazing the freedom I had. I did things like start a choir and wrote a musical that we then put on in the chapel, which was Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, but Snow White was called that because she had a cocaine habit. And it was the Seven Dwarfs were kind of various different people in the prison. Yeah, we kind of started these projects. Many were total failures, but also really good fun, I think, and allowed a space where people could come and try something new, and it was quite a confidence building space for people that were on really rock bottom. The hope being was that if they were able to engage with the first thing, then the next thing would be rehabilitation or a Through the Gate project. And I also ran in partnership with the chaplaincy, so we ran groups where people met together and prayed together and supported each other. That was the work there.
Yeah.
And I guess the reason I felt that was worth writing about, I mean, I do a lot of diarying of my day to day, and I remember talking to somebody at a dinner and telling this story about this woman who'd been doing really, really well. She was one of the girls that came out of the Rotherham, one of the victims of the Rotherham ring, and she just really put her life back together, but was being released to no address, and I couldn't for the life of me kind of fight out the route where to just find some sort of accommodation on leaving so that this progress wouldn't be lost. And I was bumped into her in the community, and she was sort of trying to get caught shoplifting, just doing terrible, really poor quality shoplifting, with the idea that, right in front of the security guards, hoping to get back in so she could have this structure. And I was talking to a friend about it, and she said, people should know that. That's really shocking. But I don't. And prison reform, I mean, you probably know, is deeply unpopular. If you're not across the nation, but if you kind of stand up before an election and say, we're going to have more lenient sentences, I can guarantee, it's not a vote winner really. But actually, prison reform is in all of our interests, for there to be less crime, less perpetrators of crime, people thriving, having other opportunities. And that person I had that conversation with worked in publishing, and rang me up a few days later and said, why don't you write a pitch? And that was how Jailbirds came to be. And we're still writing it into a film. We've got Act 1 is an incredibly slow process, but that is still chugging along. It's under its second option now, so it may well never get made. But it meant it opened up some really amazing doors in terms of bringing women to, speak to magistrates about their discussion. Because lots of people in that context will have never really got to know somebody and heard the story of somebody who's in prison or been to prison. So there was a bit of work that came from that. And again, some of the women who were in that book and helped to write it are working on the TV stuff as well, the film stuff now. Yeah.
And this book's just full of lots of really funny, moving, shocking sort of stories of women and women giving their own accounts as well of their time in prison. So I really do recommend it if you'd like to know more. It's a really good read. And some of those connections also ended up being part of your work at Refuse, because you have people who come and volunteer there who've come out the other side of the prison system. So tell us a bit about Refuse Cafe and how that got set up, because that was another little product of this crazy community that you were living in, because your co-founder was on the bunk bed with you. So.
Yeah, and I guess that's what I mean about this community being a place of sort of people being quite courageous in terms of, do you know what, let's try and find a solution to this problem. And lots of different things did come out of that house. Again, some people went into politics or environmental stuff, and but Refuse definitely kind of came out first of that kitchen table, and then we expanded from that kitchen table and borrowed, the village hall and people's cafes. And 6 years ago now, we opened a permanent warehouse and cafe restaurant in Chesterley Street, on the front street. So that is we've got a kind of quite large warehouse behind, where we take in between 10 and 13 tons of edible food a month, and sort that, send it out to different places, one of which is our cafe. We run an education project in schools, and the cafe's pay as you feel, so people can come in and they can choose to pay with their time or skills as well as money. And we have a kind of restaurant and do some catering as well, and train up young people with learning difficulties. So that's a really kind of fun space. And when I talk about all of that, it's definitely outgrown me. You know, I've been on maternity leave for a year now, and not long before that, another year. And there's just an incredible group of people who run it. There's 190 volunteers across 6 months, and 17 permanent staff who run different aspects of that. So I still feel, it's funny, lots of my reflections on this book is that time where we felt so brave to do the things that we wanted to has gone, and I don't necessarily feel that brave anymore. I feel I have the energy for it, but seeing something that was kind of sparked in that space, other people doing amazing things with, I do feel just like so grateful and so proud when I'm there, and I'm there a lot, to be honest. Everyone's like, yeah, I thought you were off. I'm like, yeah, no, I am, just here for a coffee. Yeah.
So yeah, let's talk about living together, because that's the book that has come out of some of your reflections on community living. And to be honest, you've got so much community living and working experience in such a short time that I don't think anyone would have been surprised if you'd just gone, I'm going to write a book called, Mim's Guide to Living in Community. But you didn't do that. Instead, you went and visited lots of different kinds of communities and interviewed people there and got sort of use their experiences as a basis to try and put together some reflections on what makes community life work. So yeah, why did you decide to start that book project? And yeah, tell us a bit about the story. And I think we've got some lovely pictures as well to go with it. So tell us when you want the next slide.
Stick them up and I'll kind of talk through. I might not use all of them.
Well, there's the book.
There we go. So I guess one of the things that I felt is that I had a huge amount to learn about communal living. Like, there's people who've done it genuinely, like for hundreds of years. If you look at kind of monastic communities that have been serving in particular ways for hundreds and hundreds of years, I guess recognised that we had a lot of good intentions, but actually we're starting from a place if we didn't know that much. And I kind of was thinking, well, I'd love to do it again. We were just about to move into this farm with Hannah and her husband, some others, and I felt like I really wanted to go and learn from some people that have done it in really different ways. And when I say really different ways, do you want to kind of start spinning through some of these? This was our first community when we were really just graduated, and the kind of various people. I guess that's the question I was asking, like, how can we all live in greener, more equal, more connected, healthier ways, but also in more sustainable ways, like we had been. And keep flicking through. Just to give you a flavour of the different places we went to, the first one I went to was the Bruderhof, which, as you can see in the top left there, and that is a Mennonite community, so that's the same kind of stem as the Amish, and they live with a totally common person. And what I mean by that is nobody has any personal money or personal objects even, really, with 300 of them. So not one person in that community there has their own bank account. If they want to get a new pair of shoes, they request one from the store manager. They sort of all wear the same kind of dresses, or put them in the sort of communal wardrobe and get another one out. So that is, it's really quite on one end of the extreme when you're talking about what it is to live communally. And they lived, extremely communally, that though every kind of meal was together, they had just this enormous kitchen. And it was quite hard to leave. I mean, long term, yes, but also day to day. Your school was there, the children were homeschooled, there was a doctor on site, all the meals were there. People had very, very specific roles. So when I was there, I worked in their wooden toy factory, where they produced toys for nurseries. It was kind of an amazing space, and just kind of mind-blowing in terms of its scale and its efficiency. And they had a kind of quite extreme uniformity of belief, and almost they looked very, very similar because they wore quite traditional clothing. Some of the women wore headscarves. They wore these kind of long, I mean, not just similar, the same. It was, this single wardrobe that everyone could get their clothes from. And my last community, to cap it off, is the middle picture there, which is very tactfully taken, which was the longest open naturist community.
For those who can't see at the back, it's swinging on a swing, but nude.
But the hair's in the right place, really. And between that, this is the kind of other shots. There was 1970s hippie communes with 20 families where people tried to live off the land and be self-sufficient. There's really modern communities built around co-living in London, so trying to live connected and efficient, but actually really built around the tech sector. There were kind of hacker communities. One community I was interviewing was built around, they all lived together in the Hilton in Madeira, and it was like this kind of 5-star hotel where they all met at breakfast and worked in the tech sector, and they'd managed to negotiate some deal over lockdown. It was just the most luxe sort of. But in fact, the end of that story was that the hotel asked them to leave because they'd started to sort of, pad around in their pajamas in the breakfast hall and, bring their laptops out, and it all got very casual, and they sort of turned the tides on it a bit. And again, there was kind of wellness centre communities, one kind of pitched on this is housing, but it can improve your mental health and have kind of built up community in a busy city. And I went to ones that I knew I'd love, and ones that I thought I would be sort of deeply sceptical about, but actually, often found the same kind of spirit in there, that people just wanted to connect and they didn't want to live life isolated, and they might have been living on these really big budgets in kind of amazing tower blocks in London where they all shared a pool, but actually behind it all was this same sense that we shouldn't be living in blocks next to each other unconnected. And I guess I found sometimes I had to swallow my judgments and think, do you know what, I was totally wrong about what this was. And even that kind of totally wild, Madeira community we all lived in this hotel, there was a real kind of imagination about that, them saying, why should we be working on our computers in our bedrooms in this small place where we could all, have a buffet breakfast together at the start and teach, they self-organise, breath work and cryptocurrency seminars and things. I mean, these, everyone was more or less likeable, but it was just the most incredible journey of meeting people. And the next 4 slides I'm going to just take you through and just snapshot a couple of them. Yeah, this is some of the data that kind of went behind, I guess, what it is that's driving people to want to live communally. So some people are living communally, let's take my last example, because they wanted to be free to be naked in public, and that can be frowned upon, so they made their own public, That's the sort of they call themselves the black sheep gathered together, and I kind of loved that. But actually, the day-to-day, so many people, particularly my age, particularly living in cities, are living in really separate, really isolated ways. 40% of us feel we can trust those around us, the kind of people's sense of belonging in a place, and I guess that tracks with home ownership as well. Lots of people my age can't afford to buy homes necessarily, and so then you kind of feel your roots aren't as deep maybe. A third of people often, or very often, feel lonely. And I guess it's really interesting, that graph at the bottom, because you kind of have an idea in your head, isn't it, about who you might think might be lonely. Is there somebody in a care home not being visited? And actually that's totally not the case across every demographic. People are feeling separate from one another, or like a sense of community spirit is diminished. We'll kind of skip through some of this this is, I guess some stats around home ownership and why that is that some younger people might not be able to buy, and maybe might be able to kind of feel like they're grounded in the places they are, and that might be a barrier to community. And so I have just pinched this from another talk I did, so it's not necessarily all in. Do you want to just keep skipping forward? This is Old Hall, so this is a woman in her 90s who taught me how to hand milk a cow, which they do every single day. And they pretty well only eat things grown on site in an enormous priory where they have this. That was the chapel with the Disco Mary, where they sort of have these amazing parties, and that was a 70s commune. They showed me the advert that they'd posted in the Guardian in 1974, seeking like-minded people with £10,000 to start, hippie commune. And that still was about 50 people. And the thing I found really inspiring in that community is there were loads of families who were able to kind of share childcare a bit, and people really helping one another out in that context. But actually, do you know, the other story of that was that lots of people felt that was really challenging way to parent as well, because, if you feel that slightly more supervision is required than the other 5 parents, you're doing it. There was definitely some kind of challenges that I found interesting there. Do you want to skip to the next one? This is a really, fascinating case study. This is Dicussion, which is in Amsterdam. And Amsterdam has the classic problem that we have maybe London, Manchester, lots and lots of other cities. New York's famous for it, where there's so many people going on holiday there. The price of the property is so high that actually there's not really a way people can stay in those cities. And so the kind of affordable housing question, the municipality in Amsterdam had answered by saying, well, are there any groups of people who we could sign over some land to and lend some money to do building, and who've got a business plan to create this affordable housing? So they've, just sort of farmed out to people, like, you can have the land if you're willing to create these cooperatives. And that's such a rare model in the UK, and we see it as very radical and extremely socialist, and quite a bold thing to do. It's very, very common in other parts of Europe for homes to be owned cooperatively and to have a kind of board of people rather than a landlord. So I found, those conversations really interesting. Again, I visited an amazing cooperative in Germany near Stuttgart, which was a space shared by an over 60s housing association and a creche, and it was just the most special place to be in, because it was just so full of life, and there was there was sessions every day where they met up, and it was just this really mutual benefit that happened across the board. And they had also young asylum seekers running the cafe there, so you had this a 4-year-old and a 60-year-old meeting up over Afghan food. It was a really special place. Just skip to the next one. Oh yeah, this is it's Spielplatz, which is German for playground, in the southeast. This is actually the founder at the bottom left, and a couple of the members there, and obviously me, top left. Again, it's a nice artful camera angle. You need all of these. If you're going to stick them in the newspaper, you sort of need to, master that angle. And these I found this was totally out of my zone of experience when it came to why people would live communally, because I guess there was the kind of the affordability angle, or the kind of connection angle, or we're joining together to do a project. There were some amazing examples of that, and that's sort of what ours was. But this was people feeling shunned by their communities, and so creating one which was almost a space of protection where they could be themselves within that space. And again, I think this was one where I thought, oh, this isn't going to be my cup of tea at all. And I had a really special time there, because I just felt people were really, they were, yeah, like I said, the black sheep living together. People had felt really ostracised where they were, or at odds with the communities they were in, and it was just quite a free space. And I expected it to be, I guess, a bit more kind of salacious, or a bit more, you know, what kind of community bonds moves in together just so they can have their clothes off like that. It was like, I just didn't quite get why you'd base your whole life around that, even if you like, you know, just go to a nudist beach now and then. But actually, it wasn't really about bodies. It felt quite an interesting, inclusive place in terms of, you know, there were people walking around the pool, somebody with a stoma bag and somebody else with a kind of, you know, big, small, old, young. And I was really, this was like right before I had my eldest daughter, so I was like quite heavily pregnant. I was like thumping around, you know, doing these interviews in the nude, like my dictaphone and a massive bump. And to me, I thought that was blindingly obvious that I was very pregnant. And I was interviewing this woman, and we were sitting on a bench outside doing the interview, and we got to we'd been together for 40 minutes maybe, and we got to the end, and I said, and of course I'm having a baby quite soon. She went, oh my goodness, congratulations. Like, we'd been sitting, you know, totally naked, and she just hadn't clocked. And that's the sense I say, you know, it wasn't necessarily about the bodies. For lots of people it was about discomfort even. Like, some people were there who were autistic and felt really sensitive around textures and fabrics and things being close to their skin, and that was the place they could be themselves. So yeah, I like I said, this was a trip that at every stage my assumptions were really challenged. I think we're drawing towards the end. Yeah, this is the kind of final one I mentioned, and this is Mason and Fifth in London. A very beautiful co-living building where they had kind of in-house. I mean, the website for this really tested my my sense of non-judgment, because they had a full-time expert on feelings. That it was just in-house. If you had a feeling, you needed to call someone. They had a full-time. You know, they had a movement person and a movement of feelings, and. I just think, I don't think you'd last very long in County Durham. Be like, I'm just the head of feelings at the flats over there. Yeah. But again, I went there for a lovely sound bath, and I met some people who had felt totally lost in London before they'd come to live in this place, and the other thing is, it's not cheap to live here at all. It's probably more expensive than living on your own, although kind of everything is seamless and frictionless and included. They even had somebody whose job it was, if anybody didn't get on, to, like, you know, mediate that in some way. I said, what if someone doesn't do the washing up? And they said, that would be taken care of. You know, we try to have a frictionless environment. So imagine this sort of like, I did think to myself, I wonder if this lovely community includes the sort of freelance washer-upper you're getting in to do the dispute. The answer is probably not. But again, yeah, meeting people who had felt really on their own, just coming out of COVID, this place did feel really like, you know, for them it didn't matter that they had bought their community rather than earned it, because it allowed them to come out of a place of isolation or depression. I might have come to the end there.
Yeah, there we go. Lovely.
So that's a kind of little snapshot of the various places.
And I do recommend getting a copy of the book if you want to hear more stories along those lines and meet some of the characters from these different communities, because there's some really fascinating people and some really moving reflections on the things that have challenged and surprised you. One of the sort of threads that comes through in the book is your reflections on your own experiences of living in community as something that for you has always been linked to your faith. So you kind of draw out some of the similarities between different faith-based communities, whether they're Christian or Buddhist or whatever else, and the ways that they are sort of held together by something external to themselves. It's an external reference point. And for you, all the communities that you have lived in and the community work you've done has also been connected to your faith and have been faith-based Christian communities. So I guess there's sort of two ways of thinking about that, or two different questions I have about it, which are related, which is sort of what is it about being in a faith-based community that sort of feels particularly important to you? And also, why is it that for you, your personal faith has been kind of expressed particularly in this way, that for you there's this relationship between living out your faith and doing that in community? So, yeah, you could pick one of those or kind of answer them together.
That is an interesting question. I am slightly different to my husband on this as well, in that I've always felt that my faith has been just in communication with other people and with churches and with other Christians and other people of faith. That's felt totally a part of its makeup. And I guess, the person of Jesus was very relational himself. He had these 12 disciples he carted around. He didn't necessarily need, I think, to be honest, I don't think all of them added to the day-to-day. No. And for me, I always have felt like an analogy I use is like coals in a fire. You kind of have coals in a fire and they're all really hot, and you take one out and you put it on the hearth and it cools quite quickly. And for me, faith's always felt like that. It's felt like it's not a sort of belief I can write down. It's a thing of practice. And to give you another strange thread of my faith journey is that we grew up in a Messianic synagogue because my family are Jewish. There's just sort of some threads there. I mean, we went to some kind of slightly strange, very strange Christian movements, better and worse. And one of those things I kind of loved was something that happens in Judaism where it's not this terribly, thinky, cerebral thing where we all just believe things very deeply. That there's something very, very practical about how the Jewish people live out their faith. It's like this is the bread and this is the wine, and we touch this on the doorpost, and that reminds us of this moment of faithfulness or this belief, and we'll wash our hands, and it's just very earthy, very grounded. It's not sort of up in the sky, floaty. Religion and faith isn't this floaty ideal and thoughts about this. It's your everyday, it's the tap you turn on, it's the hand you shake, it's the person you meet. And for me, that was just very reflective of how I felt I've connected with faith as well. It's never been like a very academic pursuit. And for my husband it is. He loves to go on these silent retreats. And I think, oh God, get me to the end. But for me, it's always been the kind of, the tap turned on and the shaken hand and the meal, and this mouthful reminds us of, the faithfulness of God, or this part of history, or when we meet people and serve them and have served ourselves and, give to others and the humility of receiving and being in need as well, and in our lowest moments, like all of that for me is the stuff of how I know God. And that is what draws me to community, really, is in part this sort of everyday plodding, and not God in the abstract, in the kind of floating in the air, but in other people and in food and in places, and in opening the door. I guess that's the answer.
Thank you very much. And we're coming into land in just a couple of minutes, and we'll have some time for Q&A. But one last very quick question as a sort of, I guess, practical takeaway, which is that, you've shared some really fascinating examples of people that have done this in different ways, but most of us aren't about to uproot and join a commune or even, you know, move in with a couple of other people and live in a little community. So what would be sort of just a couple of very practical, that down-to-earth, everyday stuff that you think the lives of people who've chosen to live in more deliberate communities can teach us about how we can live in kind of better, more connected ways, or what can we take away from that?
Yeah, so I mean, the conclusion is we don't actually live in a community anymore. I mean, we live on a terrace, and we keep chickens with some neighbours, and you know, supporting them to, you know, host people. We host people at ours occasionally, but we really don't live in the ways that I've met and described people as living. And yeah, like you said, you know, that our houses aren't set up that way, and most of us, you know, for at the moment, my family unit feels very much like an all-absorbing thing, and I'm not sure how that would feel in a community context. But one thing that I think I've really taken away from it is that the kind of collaboration on things, like the sharing of things, is not just an environmental thing, or it's not just a kind of money-saving thing, but actually, if we have these points, let's say, you know, at the moment we share quite a lot of tools with neighbours, or I'm involved in quite a lot of, you know, handing things up and down with children, and all of those...
Evelyn was dressed in all of your first daughter's clothes.
I'm glad to hear it. And all of those things provide so much more than resource sharing. They provide this touch point where we can connect with each other, and that's felt like something that's very special to keep on. And I guess, like, with a picture on, you know, what does the world look like in 10, 20, 30, 40 years time, we are going to need to have more local resilience. It's not going to look like the internet's allowed us to connect with people who think the same way as us, who live on the other side of the world, and we've created these kind of communities of similarity where you can find someone else who has just the same view of the world and just the same hobbies and ideals as you, and they could be living anywhere. But we've kind of lost, by prioritizing that, I guess the diversity of the doorway. You are going to have neighbours that are radically different from, that you disagree with, and are still friends, and that's kind of amazing. And I think younger generations are more and more in these communities of similarities, but what the future will look like in terms of local resilience is that we're going to need to just relearn, and when I say relearn, lots of people here might be thinking, oh, that's exactly how I live, but for younger generations it really isn't, and the kind of statistics are that as people feel less and less grounded in one place, that those connections are lost, and I think we're looking forward going to really need to relearn how to live that way and how to share resources, and that sounds pessimistic, but however you think the next 40 years is going to look, I think there is so much instability in terms of global conflict and climate change, and you know, we've seen over the last few months that even things like global trade that we kind of rely on are just not that reliable, and I think what's going to matter a lot more is that you can look after your neighbour's child for a few hours, or borrow someone else's sugar, or share a lawnmower. So I guess the things that we've taken with us are around the sharing of things, and I guess prioritising connecting with people around us in ways that means you have to live life a little bit more slowly, or have a bit of wiggle room. I went to our church coffee morning for the first time a couple of weeks ago, and there's something amazing that happens at those coffee mornings where everyone's a volunteer and you sit down and you chat to somebody, but it involves being free on a Tuesday morning and devoting the whole morning to a cup of tea. And I think, yeah, a kind of a slowness is involved in being a bit available for each other. So I guess, yeah, I mean, kids make you do that anyway, you know, we're not going anywhere fast, but definitely by being a bit slower in life, it's allowed me to just have these amazing connections with people.
Thank you. We've got about 10 minutes for Q&A, so yes, if anyone has any questions or just reflections on what you've heard and that you'd like to share, then please do put a hand up and there'll be a mic coming round. If anyone's feeling brave enough to be the first person. Oh, we've got a hand over here.
I wonder why you're talking about connectedness and not relationship. Are there different parameters to those two words?
That's an interesting. Yeah, that's an interesting question. I guess there are different levels of relationship, and one, you could be kind of connected with a wider community, but you wouldn't necessarily have a relationship with every one of those people. Oh, I'm thinking on the spot here, but you would rally round if it was needed. But I guess relationship fulfills the same term, I guess, as long as you kind of think about it as a spectrum. You're not going to be best friends with every one of your neighbours. But that's interesting. That's probably also a slight sort of affectation from connections, probably very like a bit... is what you might talk about in the workplace as well, so a workplace connection. So I guess maybe I'm using that term a bit loosely, or not sincerely enough, as a relationship would imply. Yeah, I guess there isn't a difference as long as you're thinking that you can have a relationship with someone that's big or small, you know, casual or deep.
Thank you. Any other questions people want to ask? Otherwise, I'll ask another one. I've got plenty. Go on, Jared.
Have you got one? Unless there's another one. Yeah, I had one. Just sort of thinking about this idea of local resilience. I think one of the beauties of parish churches is that they are local, sort of in their identity. Have you sort of seen churches contributing to sort of fostering local community well? And what does that look like when you have seen it?
Yeah, well, funny you should say that, Jared, but tomorrow is I go to a little sort of fuddy-duddy parish church where, you know, we sort of have the wrong hymn on the thing and have to make it up and sort of sway a bit. And the most amazing kind of annual festival, the Neville's Cross Eco Festival, runs from that church every year. It's tomorrow. And it's a church where people come to who either have a very strong belief or no belief at all, and come to and want to participate. And that feels very special and very important, that people can come because they like the space or want to sing a few hymns, or the entry requirement is really low. You can kind of come even if you just like to sort of sit in a nice wooden seat in the warm and not listen for a bit, and that's also fine. But the Eco Fest I love and think is really special and feel very proud of, because it is so it's this sort of gathering point where, you know, there's some like wooden spoon whittlers who just love meeting together, whittling the spoons. They come there. There's sort of two blokes who come and talk about their air source heat pumps and sort of answer questions about that. Fantastic, good for them. We do, you know, we're serving baked potatoes tomorrow. There's you know, people doing sort of free and slightly questionable face paints that go on. I mean, I did a few last year. and there's a swap shop and a plant swap and all of these things, and I mean, as I've chosen a very obvious example there, but for me that always feels like the kind of thing that I want to be doing more of, because it's this meeting point where everyone can come and we're trying to do something, and that's maybe all that community is.
Lovely, thank you. Anyone like to ask another question? I think maybe we've got time for one more, so I might sneak one more in if that's okay. Because I guess one of the things that sometimes people hear when they hear someone say something about communal living is they think, oh, that sounds a bit culty. What would you say is the difference between living in a community and being part of a cult? And is there a sort of spectrum of those? And how do you know when you're on the right side of this isn't a cult, this is a community, versus, oh dear, I think I've ended up in a cult? How do you kind of,
That is a great question. And can I just check this part